Well, Cuba is a very special case. So I mean, to some extent it has characteristics like other small countries, but it is unique. For 50 years, the United States has been dedicated to strangling and crushing Cuba.
Yep.
And Kennedy's Latin American advisor said the problem is the Castro idea of taking matters into your own hands, which might lead others in similar circumstances to try to follow that path, and pretty soon the whole system of U.S. control would erode. So for those reasons which persist, the United States has carried out, first of all, a massive terror campaign. Cuba's been the victim of more terror than probably the whole world combined in international terror. And beyond that, economic strangulation of an extraordinary sort.
If you are a population that wants to be independent, that wants an independent state, we might talk about other forms of independence later, but an independent state in defiance of NATO, or if you're near China, in defiance of China, or Russia for some of the former Soviet states, then it comes at a cost. And in the case of Cuba, perhaps that cost is that you're in a state of war. Being in a state of war.
You look around the world, there are similar problems, but not as dire as the one that Cuba faces. So go a little bit to the south, South America. One of the most dramatic and important developments of the past decade is that South America, for the first time since the European conquerors came, for the first time in 500 years, has made a very significant move towards independence, towards integration. There isn't a single U.S. military base left in South America, which is pretty remarkable.
The United States is not in control.
It worries them enormously. In fact, the National Security Council, top planning organization, warned that if we cannot control Latin America, how are we going to impose a successful order on the rest of the world, meaning rule the rest of the world? So if we can't control even our backyard, how are we going to control everything else? Now there's a deeper point, now moving over to the Middle East. The deep concern in the United States and the other traditional imperial powers, Britain and France particularly, concern is that now the Middle East might get out of control. And that's serious, much more serious than South America.
I agree. That's why they invaded Libya, Noam. I have no doubt about it, was to re-establish control.
I agree, but I think it's all over. So for example, if you take a look at what's happened in the Arab Spring, the countries that are crucial to Western imperial power, the oil producers, they have been under a very tough hand. In Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the Emirates, the major oil-producing regions, it never got off the ground. The intimidation of the security forces backed by the West was so enormous that people were literally afraid to go into the streets in Riyadh. The West, mainly France and Tunisia, the United States and Britain and Egypt, are following a very traditional pattern. There's a playbook that you pursue, gives you a kind of a game plan when some favored dictators lose the capacity to rule. What you do is support them until the last possible minute when it's impossible any longer, maybe the army turns against them. You get your intellectual class to issue ringing declarations about democracy, and then you try to restore the old system as much as possible. That's what's done with Somoza, Marcos, Duvalier, Mobutu, Suharto. I mean, it's routine. It takes genius not to see it.
Noam, is there a model, a practical functioning model?
Well, I think I agree with Tariq, there's many models, but I don't think that popular forces concerned with changing their own societies should be looking for models. I think they should be creating the models. And that's exactly what's happening. So models in South America, let's say, where there's been a lot of progress, they're developing models. take, say, in Bolivia, which has been mentioned a couple of times. One of the most striking things that's happened there is that the most repressed part of the population in the hemisphere, the indigenous population, has moved into the political arena, has in fact taken political power, and is pursuing its own concerns. It's also happening in Ecuador and to an extent in Peru. Well, they're developing new and significant models. And some of the aspects of those models, the West had better pick up pretty soon, or else it's all going to be over.
This conflict between the desire to do something for ideological reasons and then a sort of practical reality that, say, totalitarian capitalism may simply be the most efficient system and therefore will dominate.
It's not an efficient system. In fact, if you take a look at China, China's growth has been spectacular, but China has grown largely as an assembly plant. It's primarily the assembly plant for the advanced industrial countries on its periphery, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. So for example, take, say, Foxconn, this huge, hideous factory in China where working conditions are utterly grotesque. It's a Taiwanese-owned factory. It produces Apple computers, iPods, Dell computers, and so on. What's happened over the past years is that China has been the assembly plant for the advanced industrial state capitalist countries on its periphery and for Western multinationals. Now, of course, sooner or later, China will begin to move up the technology ladder. In fact, in some respect, it's already happening. China has actually begun to innovate with solar cells that surpass those elsewhere. And that'll begin to happen elsewhere, but it's a long, slow process. Well, a lot of things have changed over the years, and they've changed often to the better. They've changed because lots of dedicated people committed themselves to it, and that history hasn't ended. There's changes ahead, and we can do something about them. And in fact, there are very serious problems. So, for example, if the species continues on its present course, we probably will be facing destruction of the possibility for decent survival simply because of things like fossil fuel use. That's an extremely serious issue. And it's kind of like, the lemmings going over the cliff.